So this is just going to be a little quick overview of some of the stuff that I've been walking through. Oh, all right. So let's start with this test status matrix. I have used this for a number of years to talk about maintenance costs specifically, but I want to use this to frame how we think about just failures and troubleshooting tests in general. So there's really only 4 conditions for each feature. If you have a test for a feature, it can either be passing or failing. And in reality, the feature can either be working as intended or not working as intended. And yeah, there's some gradation here, but these are the 4 buckets that help us figure out what we're doing. So obviously, if it's passing and the feature's correct, things are great. The problem, the biggest issue, and the reason it's in red here is the type 2 error. So this is the one where your tests are passing, but the feature is not correct. And this is the dangerous one. I'll talk about this in a second. We'll dig into all of this in a second. But really where we spend most of our time is in the bottom line. If the test is failing and we need to figure out, is it a problem? What do I need to do about it? Is it something where the test is wrong or the site is wrong? And oftentimes testers end up in the lower left quadrant for most of their career where the test is wrong. The test is wrong. They're not actually finding real problems. They're finding in the site, they're finding real problems in their test code. And that's where everyone gets really frustrated with test automation. To the extent that I've, helped people with their code. I remember in Selenium channel, someone would come and like walk me through it, like, it's doing this, my code's doing this. How do I fix my code? And you work with them for a few minutes and you're just like, no, that's a real bug. Your site is not working the way you want it to. But they're just so used to it being a test code problem that they don't even realize when they find a real issue. So that's, a scary indictment on how we handle testing in a lot of places today. So let's dive into type 2 errors. So these are the things that you only wish you could triage because you don't know that they're a real problem. Your tests are passing, so you think things are fine, but there's a huge problem. Everyone has these. These are the scary ones because if the feature that you're trying to protect doesn't have a test to protect it, it's worse than not having a test, because not having a test, you don't have confidence. If you have a test that you think should catch a problem and it doesn't, then you have a false confidence about it. So anyway, the ways that you could be getting type 2 errors include just not putting assertions. I inherited a code base with a bunch of, like, here's our smoke tests for this product. I look at it and there wasn't a single assertion. If the code executed through the whole thing, it would pass regardless of what anything. There was no intentionality in it. And so it's very easy for the wrong thing to happen, even though there was no official error message or exception that the code threw. So you can also assert on an assumption instead of reality. I talk about this when I talk about unit testing and how unit tests are sometimes overrated. If you're mocking out the system to make your testing more focused in a specific part, that's great, but it also removes your test against reality. So we have to be really careful about mocking because you could be mocking out the piece that you actually need to know about. And so this is where contract testing and things like that come into play to make sure that your mocks are not keeping you from seeing the reality of the situation. You could also just have an incorrect failure condition. One of my things, people have usually heard red, green refactor as the test-driven development mantra, and I kind of do no, you want a red, green refactor because you want to show that the test that you wrote, when you set the failure condition, when the bad thing happens, that it actually fails. You need to make sure that it does fail before you consider that test good. And then the last thing is it could just be that the failure condition has changed. Something in the code on the site is different. Something that represents what is wrong is no longer, like, it's changed from it used to be that it would throw an error message that looks like this, and now it throws an error message that looks like that. And you were checking for the first error message, but now it's another error message, and it was getting thrown, but because the first one wasn't there, then you thought that it was working properly and it wasn't. So things like that. So I really want to talk about is that bottom row of the test is failing. What do we do about it? And a lot of our users have way too many failures in their test suites, so many that they can't properly review everything. And my mantra for the year is that your test suite hasn't finished executing until you've evaluated all your failures. And so being able to evaluate what all is going on is the most important part of getting your failures back. So general practice here, first of all, just assess the overall results. Are things looking about the same as they did the last time you ran it? Is everything failing? Is there a whole bunch of stuff that's new, that's different? Like you just start, this is kind of like a good dashboard. You're going to sit down and see right away what your day is going to be. Do I need to do something before I go get coffee, or can I go get coffee and then dig into my workload, that kind of a thing. So get a feel for where everything is, and then see if you can group failure conditions. Sauce Labs has our failure analysis tool that does this. I don't love everything about that tool, but the thing that it's good at is that it tries to pull together. These all look like the same thing. So ideally, you can say, we have a lot of failures, but it's all this same thing. Oh, yeah, log out, login is broken. So all of the tests that rely on login are failing. That makes sense. Let's fix that. And now we don't, like you don't have to go one by one to see what is unique. Um, Rule out the obvious issues. It is surprising to me how often I am brought into support tickets and things like that, where people are going back and forth on trying to figure things out. And I just, I look at the error I go to the screenshot and I look and I'm like, oh yeah, the page hasn't finished loading. Of course, you're not going to see what you're looking for there. Of course, the element's not found. The page hasn't finished loading. And it's something that is very obvious when you look at it. You look at the video and you see that the step, 3 steps ago didn't actually do the thing, and now you're at the place trying to do the next thing and it's not working, right? That's really when I was a Sauce Labs customer before I joined Sauce, 10 years ago. This is what I mostly use Sauce Labs for, was looking at the command logs with the screenshots and the video, because it's just a really quick way to see, oh, this is obviously the problem. Oh, this is obviously these things. You really want to rule that out quickly. And yeah, and did I skip over focus on new failures? Recognize that there's a difference between flaky tests and consistently failing tests and newly failing tests. So consistently failing tests means something broke somewhere at some point and just hasn't passed since then. And so like that's tech debt. That's just you've got to figure that out. And shame on you for not having already done that, as we all know. Two, you want to make sure that flaky tests, you recognize that they're a problem, you need to investigate them, but it's more likely that that is a test code issue and not a real bug. And so it's okay to deprioritize that a little bit as long as you don't actually ignore it. And the new failures are the ones that are really important because you're really trying to see in what the developers have done recently, since the last time I ran the tests, has something changed that I need to make people aware of? You were looking for fast feedback loops between devs and testing. Is there a problem? Does it need to be fixed? How quickly can we fix it? Being able to focus on the new failures and dial in on those right away is really important. So, all right. So we've grouped failure conditions. We focused on new failures. We've ruled out obvious things by looking at things like screenshots and video or errors. The error message will tell you a lot sometimes. And then you need to be able to manually reproduce to see, is this a code problem or is this a website problem? And so that's a report it or fix it. Either it's a real thing that you need to let the dev team know, or it's something that you need to go into your test code and figure out why it's doing the wrong thing. Now, we all kind of understand the report it. The fix it is where things get fun. There are 10 ways that your tests can fail incorrectly. I've grouped them into 3 categories: legitimate site changes, infrastructure issues, and unknown state. So this is the test is failing even though the site is working properly. There's 10 ways here. So legitimate site changes. So some minor locators changed. This is one that I think we overcorrect on. We think, the locator's brittle, something's changed. As long as you're not using full path XPath to locate elements, right? If you hard code that in, then any change anywhere in the DOM is going to break everything. As long as you're not doing that, you probably are overcorrecting on brittleness. It is difficult to make sure that you always have a locator that can change regardless of what else is going on in on the site. Part of this is going to be context dependent. Is it likely that the text of the site is going to change, or is it likely that the class names are going to change? Is it likely that do you have data attributes that are specific for testing that you can use? So those are some kind of strategies there. But a minor locator change will cause your test to fail, even though the site is working correctly. The next thing is a site redesign. So this is kind of like a whole nother level to a locator change. This is all the class names you were using are gone, right? Or something dramatically was different. And I think this is important because there's no amount of slightly improving your locator strategy that's going to save you from a site redesign. You're just going to have to redo everything. And hopefully, well, and the fact that, yeah, the tagline here, someone should have said something like, if your devs have completely redesigned the site and you haven't updated your test code, or the test code isn't updated to that site redesign and it's not synchronized, that's a big problem. And probably need to have some meetings about that. And then the last thing is the feature itself has changed. And so maybe it's a different flow. There's a different way to get to doing that action, or it's a different input. This could be, as simple as it used to be a checkbox and now it's a drop down, right? Or it used to be radio buttons and now it's a drop down. Whatever that is, something is different, that the site's working correctly, but the way we're testing for it is wrong. And so all of these things are things that if you had good communication and you're using good practices, you should not run into issues with. I'm going to come back to this in a second, though, too, at the end. So infrastructure issues, 3 different things here, and find the DevOps. So first of all, the system under test. This is where are you deploy? This is like the traditional staging environment or the test environment for the company, right? Like the traditional one is a mess. Like everyone's constantly updating to this huge monolithic staging environment, and it's never in a useful state and all sorts of problems. So this is the reason why you'll end up with a failure, because the system itself is not able to give you the information that you need. I've also seen this with like more recently for an ephemeral, like deploying to AWS, and you haven't deployed to a powerful enough server to actually handle the traffic of your running your automated tests in parallel. I've actually had that happen to me at my last company. Is went to the DevOps, and they're like, oh yeah, no, that's just for looking at, not for running tests again. So I'm like, all right, we need to fix that then. Could be the CI execution tool. I have seen users trying to run too many tests in parallel from the same Jenkins instance, or just an underpowered node that can't handle all of the communication, either for memory or processing power. And then finally, network limitations that could come in all sorts of different ways. I've seen load balancer issues. That's one type of infrastructure here. I've seen issues where just proxies are a big thing here. That some proxy information prevents something from loading that's needed for the test to work. But that's the infrastructure. So unknown states, this is stuff I've talked a lot about the last few years, but test data management, especially when you're running tests in parallel, making sure that you're interacting with data that doesn't conflict with other tests is very important and often overlooked. And so you could have a false failure because 2 tests were trying to change the same object at the same time, and one of them won and one of them lost. It could also be system conditions. This is stuff like having cookies from the previous test still on the browser, or some system settings and cache. This is one of the reasons why Sauce Labs has a separate VM, a brand new session that's clean, known state every single time you start a session. And that's why it's good practice not to run too many different tests in the same session. Ideally, you're running 1 test per session. Code determinism. This is This is when you, so a good example of this is someone that's trying to test both a mobile site and a desktop site. And so you have in your code this conditional that says if you see the mobile button, do the mobile thing. And if you don't see the mobile button, do the desktop thing, which is great, except for that's non-deterministic because what happens if that mobile element is going to be there, but it just wasn't there yet when you looked, right? And so now you're taking two different paths depending on the condition of something that you can't correctly evaluate with certainty. This is also there's a framework that I was at a couple of companies ago that tried to magically go through these form like the site had like multiple forms, like all sorts of modals that would go through a whole flow, and you'd have maybe 10 forms that you were filling out one after another. And it tried to magically figure out how to move from one thing to the next. So it was constantly checking for the state of the form to see does it have a next button? Does it have a publish? Does it have a continue? Does it? And it would, based on what it saw, it would change how it did certain things. And if anything gets off anywhere, now you have no idea where you're at, and you're going to end up with problems. And so the more deterministic you can make your code base, the fewer conditionals you have, the more reliable everything's going to be. And then race conditions, this is where we spend most of our lives as testers, is making sure that we're waiting for the right things, that we've got our explicit weights, that we're throwing in an implicit weight in case that improves things a little bit, or sleeps if we're too lazy to figure things out right away. Again, don't use sleeps if you can avoid it. Um, so there's 4, 7, 10. So those are the 10 ways that sites, or that you can have a failure when the site is working properly. And just as a quick note, because self-healing has come up quite a bit, the the one of these 10 that self-healing addresses is this first one. A minor locator has changed. And the assumption is the locator has changed, the right element exists, it just has a different locator, and we're going to magically interact with that new locator rather than the old locator and not tell you. And so, like, I really, really dislike the whole idea around self-healing because it makes this type 2 error much more likely because it's hiding information from you. If it's something that needs to be fixed, tell me to fix it. I will fix it. I will make sure that it's correct, but don't hide it from me and make me think that something's passing when make me think that the feature is correct just because the test is passing. It is definitely possible. We've run experiments on, can you get a self-healing tool to click the wrong thing that would break the app? And uh, absolutely can get type 2 errors. All right, so that's what I have as far as the 10 different types of um, errors, or the failures that you get, that where the site is working even though the test is failing, and kind of my approach of how to start digging into those things by triaging the main issues, and then digging through point by point. And each of these have different things that you can do to improve them. So anyways, does anyone have any questions? We'll stop there.